Welcome to Native Bidaské, Native News Online's weekly broadcast that sheds more light on those making news and leading change in Indian country. Today we have a special guest with us. Her name is Valerie Red-Horse. She's Cherokee, and she produced or made the movie Mankiller. So Valerie, welcome to Native Bidaské.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. And yes, I was a producer and a director on the Mankiller PBS documentary.
And I understand you teach at Stanford now, correct?
I do part-time. I have many jobs, but one of them is very fun, and that is teaching in Native American Studies at Stanford. And also, it's also through the comparative study of race and ethnicity. So really focused on our next generation of diverse leaders.
And to your point of having several jobs in Indian country, most people I know have multiple jobs. They may have a lead job, but they also are doing many things and as we like to say, leading change in Indian country. So welcome to Native Bidaské. And
thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're excited to talk about Wilma Mankiller because last month, as you well know, the quarter was released. And she's a part of that series where they're running prominent American women. And the idea that Wilma Mankiller is on the quarter now is pretty exciting as far as I'm concerned. And I would hope that those who receive that quarter take a look. If they don't know who she is, look it up and Google it. And hopefully the film will come up. And I actually just got I was actually at the release in Tahlequah, Oklahoma last month, but I went to Washington, D.C. and I took the Amtrak home and I reached in my pocket and sure enough, there was a Wilma Mankiller quarter. So I don't know if I got it in Washington, D.C. or on the train coming back, but I was pretty excited and I took it out and I said, I'm going to start my own collection of Wilma Mankiller coins as I receive them. So.
Oh, wonderful. Well, Levi, when we set out to make the film, we started in 2011, right after she passed in 2010. And one of our purposes was to hopefully amplify her voice and create something that people could see who may not have known what a great leader she was. There are many people who just didn't know Wilma Mankiller. And so what we're excited to announce this week is it's now going to be available on Apple TV and iTunes. So anyone can watch it, anyone can download it and access it. So that's pretty exciting if people want to learn a little bit more. It covers her entire life.
Yeah, no, when you were making the film, what was one or two things that really stood out in terms of her leadership that really transcends the idea she's Native American, first a woman principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, but Wilma really was for mankind, humankind, I should say. She transcends being Native American as a leader. But what are those leadership qualities that really stood out for you?
There were a few things that just stood out so abundantly for me in learning about her life. And keep in mind, we researched for many, many years and we met with her family and her coworkers and Gloria Steinem. And so we covered her entire life. And I would say the number one thing for me is as a political elected leader, she truly was the definition of servant leadership. She was there for her constituents. She did not have a selfish bone in her body. And she was also very unifying in that she worked with Republicans and Democrats and tribal people and non-tribal people and international people. And she really had a commitment to making a difference and just really working in what she called Gadugi, which is a Cherokee word that means working for the best possible way, in a good way, for the benefit of the community. And I would love to see more of our political leaders have her servant attitude and her less divisive attitude that I think is so important. So that was really number one for me. But then I also loved how her personal story is overcoming obstacles and serious challenges and turning them into these building blocks that became positive. So, she was removed into San Francisco on a relocation that was hard for her. She was struggling with health issues. She had a bad marriage initially. She then went through divorce, came home, was living in a car without any money or resources, and also really suffered from a lot of serious illnesses her entire life. But she took all of those sort of negatives and turned them into a positive learning building blocks, I would say, to become a leader that was just so in tune with life and people and really making life better.
And to your point about the climate of today's political leadership, everything is such cutthroat, and we're so polarized as a nation. And so the likes of Wilma Mankiller really would be welcome. Hey, you mentioned Gloria Steinem, and she was at the release of the coin in Oklahoma when I was there at the Cherokee Nation. Tell us about the connection, because that kind of surprised me. And since then, I've heard other stories, but I'm so intrigued by that. Tell us that connection about the Gloria Steinem connection with Wilma Mankiller.
Absolutely. So they actually were very, very close friends. They often called each other best friends. And they got to know each other, obviously, through the women's movement and the promotion of the ERA, and just, coming together to really be strong voices for women's issues and feminist values. And as they became friends, it became more than just an activism, connection. They became personal friends, so much so that when Gloria was married later in life, she got married on Wilma's property in her front yard and had Wilma preside over the wedding. And then towards the end of her life, they had worked on a lot of projects together. Wilma became part of the Ms. Foundation on the board, and they were going to write a book together. And as you will see in the film, Gloria says very tearfully that as she was preparing to go write a book with Wilma, she got a call to come soon, and she knew what that meant. It was time for Wilma to pass, but they were very, very close. And for me, as a female filmmaker, the ability to sit in Gloria's living room and interview her, we just talked for hours and hours while we were part of that interview process. And it was amazing, just an amazing experience. She's, I think, 86 or 87, and she was in yoga class when I arrived. So she's doing great.
Well, that's wonderful. I know I had an opportunity to talk to her at Cherokee Nation last month, and as I said, I was surprised, and I was able to share with her. I've heard her speak in person at least twice, and have always admired the great work she's done for females. And as we who are a little older come to understand, the younger generation really doesn't always understand. They don't know who Gloria Steinem is. Why don't you just take a minute, tell us who Gloria was or is in history of the movement for women in the United States and around the world.
Well, given her age, you can go back in time and realize that in the 60s and even the 50s, women were not, even though the right to vote had passed, obviously, women were still not given positions of power. They were not thought of as business leaders. There were often rules, even like banking rules, like you had to have your husband co-sign for you. There were so many things that needed to be addressed. And really what Gloria did is she became both, I would say, the national, but even international face of women's rights. And so she would organize groups in cities, whether it be marches or just pushing for legislation. And what I think is so interesting about the success of her work, and later heading up the Ms. Foundation, which did amazing work, and I mean, she's just an international expert on women's rights, and from legislation to reproduction. I mean, everything about women's rights. But what I love is that when she met Wilma learned about grassroots organizing from Gloria around women's rights. And she also learned from the Black Panthers in San Francisco. And she took all of that grassroots organizing knowledge and brought it back to Cherokee Nation. And so you see that influence from Gloria and the ability to bring people together with a common passion. And you can get something done with that. And that's what Wilma really picked up and learned, I would say, from Gloria. And I think Gloria learned from Wilma a lot about the American Indian way of life and spirituality and just the love of nature and preservation of culture and land. And I felt that was really poignant for Gloria, that connection.
Yes, and after the fact, I've been talking to several people about the Gloria Steinem and Wilma Mankiller connection, and we at Native News, I think we like to do a story about that. Maybe we'll be calling you to get a little more input, but I just think that's a phenomenal story. And you mentioned, Valerie, Wilma learning in the grassroots, and we know she was at Alcatraz because her family was relocated from Oklahoma to the San Francisco Bay Area. So she was a teenager, as I recall, and then she actually, whereas she didn't necessarily go to the island, but she was back and forth, but she's coordinating supplies and working at the Indian Center in San Francisco. What can you tell us about that activism that really helped shape her life?
Absolutely. I will say that in our film, the section we filmed in both San Francisco and Oakland, where she had been really active, was one of my favorite experiences, just to feel that energy again. One of her quotes is, when they were active fighting for tribal rights and American Indian rights, you could see Jimi Hendrix on the street corner and, Janis Joplin down the street. And it was just a time of reformation and so many movements starting in that area. And that's where I live now. So, it's still like that. And what I loved, just kind of a fun fact about the story, is she said they didn't have any money, meaning the entire, American Indian movement at that point, and the American Indian House, and where they hung out. They had to constantly look for donations and whatnot. And when it was time to do the protest on Alcatraz, she, to your point, had to go back and forth. And she was able to borrow a boat from Fogarty of CCR. The CCR had just, become sort of famous and well known, and they had made some money, and they had this boat, and they loaned it to Wilma to go back and forth to the island. So we went to them, he's still alive, and they donated their song Fortunate Son to our film, and we play it over the San Francisco section because there was such a connection there in support of what Wilma was doing. But it definitely was a time where it wasn't just a protest to garner publicity. It actually resulted in Nixon at the time, who was president, making some big changes legislatively about land rights and water rights. So it was a very effective and successful protests that we look back. I think any of us who are Indigenous, Native heritage, look back at Alcatraz with a smile on our face, knowing that laid some really important groundwork.
It really did, and actually, before the pandemic broke out, it was the 50 years anniversary of Alcatraz, and Dr. Nadada Warjack and then Lenny Foster came to Grand Rapids, where I live, and we actually hosted them at two universities, Western Michigan and Grand Valley State University, and to listen to the stories. And they really did lay the groundwork for so much important work that has come forward. And as the American Indian movement rose subsequent to that, they really helped pave the road for Native American rights in the United States. And I always like to do this. I like to say it to our young people. You really need to really see that history, because what you see today with some of the fabulous casinos, and some of them are quite spectacular. You get down in San Diego County and you see some Indian gaming facilities that are just absolutely beautiful, worth millions and millions of dollars, and across the United States, actually. But it's just, that didn't happen just because the white guys were being friendly towards us. It would happen for struggles. And so Wilma Mankiller was right there. And when the coin was released last month, the principal chief said that he didn't realize she had been part of that movement. And so he actually smiled about it as he was talking. And so it's fantastic history, and I really do encourage young people to study that history, because it really helps shape us to who we are today as Native Americans. And
absolutely, Levi. And when we went to make the film, we realized that she's not covered necessarily in the history books of American, academics anywhere in the curriculum. And if she ever is covered, it's sort of brief. And so the movie We cover her entire life, like I said, and so we do a very thorough view of Alcatraz. We have Richard Oakes on there. We show all that happened, and then all the way through her leadership, which includes the implementation of bringing gaming into the Cherokee Nation, and how challenging that was. And at the time, there was a lot of pushback, even from her own people. But she did it in a way, again, where she listened to everyone and she understood the concerns. And I have to say now, the Cherokee Nation, I believe there's 10 full Class 3 casinos, and they have a thriving $1 billion enterprise of economic development that expands into the medical hospital that she started. So she had laid some very important groundwork for the growth and really the thriving of the Cherokee Nation.
Yeah, that's why I am excited about the quarter that was released, and then now that we can shine more light on the film that was originally, was it 2018, and it was shown on PBS during Women's History Month, as I recall. And so, yep. Tell us about the Apple connection that's just happening recently.
Yeah, so we actually were hired originally by PBS and the native portion of PBS, which is Vision Maker Media, to make the film as a documentary. It's a feature documentary, and it what premiered, to your point, in 2018 on PBS. And then with this release of the quarter, we were able to then ask, and the co-producer on this is amazing. Her name's Gail Ann Hurd, and she produces The Walking Dead and she's just huge in Hollywood. And she was really the one who led the effort to make sure that it could be seen broader and wider. So right now, starting this week, anyone can order it from Apple TV or iTunes. So we hope to reach a broader audience, because our whole reason for making the film was to let people know about Wilma and hope that people who maybe didn't know about her could learn something from history.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes in journalism, we get accused of just talking about the good things and not shining on the negative. But there's been some negative pushback with Wilma Mankiller, particularly around the freedmen. And can you address that? Do you address that in the film, or can you talk about it now?
We don't really address it in the film. We have an hour to try to get her entire life story. But obviously I researched her life and did a lot of reading, both from her and from others, and talked to people she worked with. I want to be clear, I am not a spokesperson for the Cherokee Nation or for Wilma or her family. But as the filmmaker who covered her life, what I can say is it was a very challenging decision for her and her administration. At the time, there was a lot of sort of corruption going on around tribal cards and enrollment, and she was, tasked with sort of cleaning that up. And what I do know is she tried to make the best decision that would be the best decision for all of the community. And it's hard when you're in leadership, and I know she struggled with that. And all I would say in broad strokes is every decision she made, she tried to make the best decision for everyone. And even she admits she made some mistakes. It's hard to be in politics and, not have some decisions that really weigh heavily on you. But what I will say, in just looking at the body of her work and the legacy she left, most of her work was absolutely positive and really, really supported and empowered the Cherokee Nation and really supported women and people of color and anyone that she felt had been marginalized. She was really an advocate, so I think overall her record speaks for itself.
Yes, and I know Gloria Steinem defended her equal rights back last month when in Holocaust. So, and thank you for that answer. Now, that same week, the U.S. Mint showed your film at the Martin Luther King Museum, correct? And tell us who the two special women who were there.
Absolutely. It was so exciting. Yeah, we had a screening that honored Wilma because of the quarter, and it was in conjunction with the U.S. Mint, the Women's History Museum, and held at the MLK Library. So an amazing group of hosts that came together. But we were able to bring out Felicia and Gina and Gina's son. And so we had the two daughters, Wilma's daughters, there, and we were able well, it was the U.S. Mint that did it, but they presented them with 2 of the first quarters that had her likeness on it. And it was great to see them. Gina is similar to her mom. She suffers from some of the same illnesses, and it was just really nice that she was able to be there. And I just love both those women. They're similar to Wilma, and they have a lot of fire and passion for their work, and they do a lot in and around the Cherokee Nation still.
Yes. And Valerie, that's the importance. I love the idea that they're working hard to keep their mother's legacy alive, and such an important legacy. And again, I encourage young people to learn everything you can learn about Wilma Mankiller. She was somebody who really stood apart when it comes to leadership the last 50 years in Indian country. So
absolutely.
Yes. And so Valerie, thank you very much. Chi-miigwech for coming on Native Bidaské. And hopefully people will see Mankiller, and we hope to have you on again.
Oh, thank you so much, Levi. Thank you to you and your crew and everyone. They've been fantastic. Thank you.
To our viewers, thank you for watching another episode of Native Bidaské. Please tune in next week for another episode, and tell your friends and neighbors if they were not able to watch this live today, they can watch us on our social media channels, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So come back and see us next week. Thank you very much. Chi-miigwech. Have a good week.